Mosheki Moni Buddha, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome all of those on the interwebs. I just did this off camera, but we'll go ahead and add meditation back to our schedule. So we'll sit for 10 minutes-ish, and after that we'll get to the Dharma talk and the chanting. back, everyone. Alright, before we get started on the Dharma talk, please join me in invoking our teacher's name 3 times. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha, Namo Shakyamuni Buddha, Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. Alrighty. So today's topic for the next several weeks will be on the Four Noble Truths. So at least once in all my Dharma talks, I always emphasize the importance of the foundational teachings. And so today, instead of emphasizing, I'm just going to teach them. So I'll kind of put it out there. Can y'all hear me okay? Okay. I guess I don't need the mic. So the Four Noble Truths are the Buddha's very first sermon, very first teaching to his first 5 disciples. And I would always say that since Buddhism doesn't have a Bible, if Buddhism did have a Bible, the Four Noble Truths would be its contents. Because everything else, all the other teachings stem from the Four Noble Truths, right? And then the fourth Noble Truth is the teaching of the Eightfold Path. From there, it spreads out to other different teachings. So Four Noble Truth is the hierarchy of everything. It's the highest teaching. And just by truly understanding and truly mastering and comprehending and contemplating the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, we can attain enlightenment. We can become an arhat. We can enter nirvana just by fully grasping and understanding the Four Noble Truths. So just by that, we should hopefully be able to realize just exactly how important the Four Noble Truths are. So, the Four Noble Truths, just a backstory on the Buddha. So, we all know that the Buddha used to be a pretty high official, or not official, but he used to be a prince, right? So, Siddhartha Gautama used to be the prince. So, he had this life of luxury, right? He had all his needs met. Everything that he ever wanted was completely fulfilled. No sort of displeasure or anything like that in his life. Until one day where he kind of snuck out. Not really snuck out, but he got out of his palace, right? And saw the 3 sightings. The sightings of illness, of old age, and death, right? So that kind of sparked the whole interest in what is life? What is this suffering that people have to go through. And then on a 4th sighting, he saw an ascetic, a monk, a mendicant, right? And from that point, he decided to leave the life of luxury, to leave his princely life, and to find freedom from the suffering of old age, sickness, and death. So he left the palace, right? He became a mendicant. He practiced austerities. He practiced asceticism for 6 years, right? He mortified his body to the deepest extent where he almost died a couple of times because he was so malnourished. But after a while, he realized that this extreme austerity is not working either, right? So the complete life of luxury doesn't take away the pain, and the complete asceticism also doesn't take away the pain. Right? So he came to the realization of the middle way, the middle path, which is what we practice, right? It's neither of the extreme, it's kind of the balance of everything in the world. So once he realized that, he kind of, ate and got back to health, and for another while, he during all these 6 years, he practiced with 5 other ascetics, right? And so when he realized about the middle path, he started eating. The ascetics were like, oh, look, Gautama Siddhartha has left the life of an ascetic, and now he's eating, right? He's attaining, or he's indulging in luxury of food. So they kind of, left him. But once the Buddha realized enlightenment and realized how to obtain freedom of life through the Four Noble Truths, and then he became a Buddha, at first, he didn't know how to express the teachings, right? There's no really words that we can explain nirvana in a way. Nirvana specifically is very experiential. You have to experience it. I can write a whole book about what nirvana is, but it won't make any difference to you because you really have to experience that. And it's the same thing with any other practice, any other teaching in Buddhism, right? It's not something we do passively. It's a proactive practice. We have to actually apply it within our life if we want to bear or benefit from any of the fruits. We have to actually apply it to our life. So when he was finally convinced, right, according to stories, right, higher beings came down to him and were like, hey, you need to teach the world because, the world needs freedom too. And so they said, some people have little dust in their eyes and they can accept the teachings easily. But some have a lot of dust in their eyes and it'll take a little bit more effort to teach, right? And because of that, that's why we have so many different sutras, so many different teachings, because each person learns differently, right? So you may learn something easily or a little bit more advanced than Leon would, or vice versa, right? So there's different many teachings. So when we see the example of those with a lot of dust in their eyes, it just means that the Buddha had to bring or create different similes and parables and examples to be able to teach them so they can also comprehend and understand. So anyway, so when he finally found the 5 ascetics, again, his first 5 disciples, and he declared the Four Noble Truths. They were also the first 5 arhats, the first 5 to also attain enlightenment. And then he preached the discourse on the first turning of the wheel. I'm trying to remember its name in Sanskrit. Dharmachakravatana Sutra. It's his first discourse. And it's a fairly short discourse, sutra, but it's very important because that's where he expounded the Four Noble Truths. So anyway, so today I'll probably just be touching base on the first Noble Truth. The first and the fourth are the most important and the most lengthy. So I'll probably just go over the first Noble Truth today, and the second and third next week, and then the following week after that we'll do the fourth Noble Truth. But the fourth Noble Truth is life is suffering, or just suffering, dukkha, in Sanskrit and Pali. And because when we use the word suffering pretty often in the teachings and the Dharma, but it also conveys a sense of despair or torture or like just hard pain, right? But really, it's more or less used as the better term to be used would be dissatisfaction, right? So, and we can also say that instead of saying life is suffering, you can say that in life there's suffering, right? So we may be happy and content sometimes, but there are moments where we do suffer, right? So life is not just all suffering. There's the good and the bad. So I'll use the in life there's suffering. And suffering, or dukkha, doesn't just mean actual suffering, right? Like we physically get hurt, right? We get hurt, we get knock our head on something, we get physically hurt. It's also emotional hurt, it's mental. It can also be even spiritual, right? Spiritual suffering, because a lot of people who try to find something within religion and they don't find it, right? They're trying to seek that enlightenment, they're trying to seek some sort of liberation. And if they don't find it, then they kind of get discouraged and either quit or move along to something else, right? So there are different kinds of suffering. The Buddha taught us that there are 8 main kinds of suffering, okay? Which are birth, sickness, old age, death, being away from loved ones, being with those that we dislike, not getting what we want, and then the flourishing of the 5 aggregates, or the 5 skandhas, which is form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. And we'll touch about that in a different session. But those are the 8 main types of suffering. So those are kind of when we read about those or when we talk about those, right, those seem like big things: death, life, sickness, not being with someone we love, being with people we hate, right? Those are big things. But suffering is also the little things, right? They're the little agitations that we have, right? They are the um, they're the anxieties that we have. They are when we're complaining, we're suffering, right? When we're arguing, when we're judging, we're suffering, right? So there are little things that we don't really notice that we should, right? Because typically when we read um, teachings on suffering, it's always almost emphasizing the bigger things in life. But really, it's the little things that really kind of make up the bulk of our suffering, our mental suffering. So when we talk about suffering, right, suffering, the big takeaway from the first noble truth of suffering is impermanence, right? Impermanence is also a big topic in Buddhism. And impermanence is teaching us that, yes, there's suffering, but there's also not going to be suffering, right? So when we think about impermanence, and we really have to, and the reason why it's so important is because in life we naturally grasp and hang on to things. We naturally become attached to people and things and places, right? We don't want to let them go because they're nice feelings. Our habit mind, clings and hang on to the things that are pleasurable and kind of, suppresses or pushes away those that are unpleasurable. But because of that, because we do that, right, we are just going after all the pleasurable things. But even those pleasurable things will, either die or run out or get lost or broken, whatever it may be, right? So we hang on to the pleasurable things, and when it changes, impermanence, right? When impermanence happens, when it changes, whether it breaks or gets lost or whatever it may be, we suffer because now we're angry or we're depressed or we're just whatever it is, right? Something changed in something that we want to hang on to, and when it's not there anymore, when it changes, then we suffer. And same thing with people, right? We're naturally attached to our family and our friends, right? We naturally have this love for them. And so if they were to move away or they were to pass away, then we feel this huge grief, right? Which is natural, but the thing to remember and the thing that we forget is, death is a natural state of our humanhood, right? It's a natural process of life. But because we try to avoid it, we try to avoid death as much as possible, right? We try to work out, we try to take supplements and do exercise and all this other stuff to kind of extend our lifespan, right? Which is fine, right? We want to try to live as much as we can, but we are avoiding and we're forgetting the part of that life that it will end, we will die. And so when it happens, we get so scared, we get fearful, we get depressed, we get anxious, we get sad, and blah, 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 right? All these other feelings. But it's important to remember that within impermanence, and especially with people, death is natural. Death is going to happen. So in Buddhism, death is a very serious topic. It's a very important topic because within the practice of understanding death, right, we have to really be able to create these mental reminders in a way that death is there. We have to accept death. Death is coming. Death is going to get all of us in the end. But it's important to remember that. It's important to kind of be mindful and to practice mentally that death is going to happen, because then that way when it does happen, it doesn't really impact us so hard. It doesn't impact us as much as it may impact us if we weren't to accept or acknowledge death, right? So in the Four Noble Truths, there are 3 aspects and 12 insights. So each Noble Truth has three aspects, right, which total 12. And each of the 3, for each of the Noble Truths, the first aspect is recognition, right? Recognition, recognizing that suffering is there, acknowledging that suffering is there, right? If I were to Christopher who hit me back, we think that suffering is the hitting part, right? I hit him, he hit me, that's the suffering. But really, the suffering there is pain. Pain is the root of the suffering. And so when we go through our life, when we go through times of distress and anxiety, we tend to blame the situation or we tend to blame the people. And that's a bad thing to do because then if we are blaming people, then we have this resentment toward them, right? We have this anxiety toward not wanting to see them or talk to them, whatever it may be. And we forget that, yeah, they might have caused something unpleasurable for us, but that's not the suffering. The suffering is the actual feeling, it's the actual um, thing as it truly is. So it's either pain, it's, cold or hot, right? Pain is pain, cold is cold, heat is heat, right? You have to find the root cause of what the suffering is, and then from there we can really understand it and kind of work toward it. Work toward either eliminating it from our life, work toward lessening it out a little bit. But that's the main focus. That's why we always emphasize mindfulness, right? Being mindful of the things we do, the things we say. Because if I were to start yelling at someone, right? If I just woke up in the morning, I didn't have a coffee yet, right? Most people, if they haven't had coffee yet, they're already groggy as heck, right? So if you were to interact with someone that's in your house, roommate, spouse, whoever, and you start yelling at them because the coffee isn't ready, then then they start yelling at you, and then you're already angry, and you have to wait for the coffee. So you're 15 minutes late to work, you're 15 minutes late to school. You get to school, you get to work. You're still angry, you're still groggy, and then you start lashing out at other people, right? They're like, hey, what's going on? And they start a whole fight, and so your whole day is ruined just because your coffee wasn't made, right? Or just because you allowed the emotion, the anger of coffee not being made to kind of take over. And because of that, because we didn't acknowledge the suffering that's there, we didn't really face it and allow it to kind of allow ourselves to be mindful of it, it kind of took us over and ruined our whole day. But on the other hand, if you did wake up and notice that the coffee's not there or not made yet, then we're like, okay, the coffee's not there. My suffering now is being late, or my suffering is, the fact that my mentality, my ego expects the coffee to be made when I wake up, right? So there, by acknowledging that it's your ego that's being like, hey, the coffee's not made, it needs to be made for me because I expect it to be made when I get up, right? But, so if we realize that, if we're able to be mindful, acknowledge that, and maybe whoever is making the coffee is also running late, so they weren't able to start it on time, right? So, we always say there's two sides of every story. So by realizing that we didn't allow the suffering to take over us, and we're not ruining our day, we're not ruining other people's day, right? So we have to be mindful of the causes that can kind of create a chain reaction by not being mindful of our suffering. There was a story that the Buddhist once told about a father and a son. The son who had a pretty big temper, big angry temper, right? And so for the father, instead of fighting anger with anger, he gave his son a bag of nails and a hammer. And he said, for every time you allow your temper to take over, I want you to go hammer one nail into the fence, right? So he did this every day, multiple times a day, until one day he got to the point where he didn't need to nail any nails in the fence, right? So now the father's like, okay, so every time that you're able to control your temper, go ahead and take one nail out, right? So every day he would do that once, twice, 3 times a day until a day came where he didn't have to take it out anymore. So then the father congratulated him. He's like, congratulations, you've managed to hold your temper. But now look at the fence. It's full of holes. You've changed the fence forever, right? So in the same way, when we are angry and we react to things and to people, we create a scar that's there forever. if someone was to stab me by accident or on purpose, right, they can apologize all they want, but that scar is going to be there forever, right? Because you stabbed me, and you could have avoided stabbing me, right? So we have to be mindful of that, right? Sometimes we think, oh, it's my happiness, it's my suffering, it's my life, it's my freedom, right? But we don't realize that some of our actions, almost all of our actions, also impact other people, right? So if you were to wake up that day angry because your coffee's late and now you're late to work, and you were to rushing through work, right? You're driving recklessly, you're driving too fast. Maybe you caused an accident, right? So now it's not only that you're late, you've also wrecked your car. Maybe you got hurt, and now the other person wrecked their car. Maybe they hurt, maybe they even died, right? So your suffering didn't just suffer for yourself. You've caused suffering for another person and their entire world of family and friends because they've lost someone. Because it's all about you. It's all about me, right? It's all about me being late. I'm suffering because I'm late. I'm, gonna get in trouble, or I'm worried about my time or whatever, right? It's always about me, me, me. And that's another big topic that we can talk about later. But that's another thing about our suffering is it is controlled mostly by our mind, by our ego, right? Our ego is the identity that we have for ourselves, that we've created since we were born, right? So it's been created, it's been molded by our family, by our friends, by our society, by our environment, right? And so if you're growing up, let's say you're growing up, I'll give you a good example. When I was in grad school in Denver, I took one of my friends who comes from a wealthy background, took them to Visak, one of the temples there. Visak, so basically Christmas for Buddhists. And so usually for all the bigger ceremonies, there's always a procession of the monks and nuns, right, that kind of start and go through the temple, right, and up to the altar or to the platform. And while they're doing that, everyone that they're passing, all the members and the guests, they're usually bowing down to the monks. So my friend was like, why are they doing that? I'm like, it's, out of respect. You should be respecting the monks and nuns. It's like, but they're just people. I'm like, yeah, but they're kind of special people in a way, right? These are monks and nuns who've left all the luxuries of life, all the comforts of life to become monks and nuns, to become away from the world and to teach the Dharma. So that's why we respect them, because they're giving us something back in return, basically. But he was just, he didn't understand. And so once the ceremony started, there was one of the members, I think it was a member, or maybe it was a junior monk, but the abbot at the time would be kneeling down, right, and the attendant is holding this scripture, and the abbot's reading off of it, right? It's basically all the prayers and blessings for the ceremony. And so the friend was like, well, can't he just hold it himself? I'm like, what? Why are you being so judgy right now, right? And so he was just complaining about things, right? And he comes from a Catholic background. So I'm like, aren't you Catholic? It's like, yeah. I'm like, don't you typically go to the altar and basically kiss the hand and the ring of the priest and kiss his cross and kiss the Bible that millions of other people have touched? Isn't that a little bit weird too? He's like, yeah, but that's tradition. I'm like, yeah, exactly. It's also tradition. It's just not your tradition. So sometimes we're in a new situation, new environments. We have a habitual habit to judge or make comments or opinions, right? And so when we do that, sometimes they're not true, right? Just like the friend who's complaining about this is weird, right? But that mentality, that opinion isn't true because he doesn't see the truth behind what they're actually doing, which is, part of the religion, part of the tradition, right? That's the truth. So I thought it was weird. No, nevertheless, I never took him to the temple again, but I kind of forgot my point. But our ego. So when we're in situations facing something different, out of the ordinary, or just unpleasant, right? Our egos typically take over, and we start judging, and we start, opinionating, and all this other stuff, right? Just like if we're driving and we're kind of in a rush, and someone cuts us off, or like, how dare you cut me off? I got somewhere to go. I got somewhere to be. I'm important. I'm driving a nice Lexus, and you're driving like a Hyundai 1998 car, right? I'm clearly more important than you are, right? And so we have these judgments sometimes that causes us our suffering, and we may not realize that at the time, but just like a sickness, right? If we feel like we're getting sick in the beginning, and we try to take care of ourselves by taking medicine or whatever to kind of get at it early on, right? Then it won't be so bad or as worse a few days from now. So the same thing when we're suffering, or when we're kind of having these little moments of anger, right? So if we're able to kind of touch them at the time and deal with them right then and there, versus holding it in, bottling it in, then because if we do that, then something may happen, or someone may trigger something where you just kind of let it all out, right? And you just create this whole clash of whatever, of emotions and anger. And we really want to avoid that. And we avoid that by being mindful, by applying the three aspects. So the first aspect I already mentioned was recognizing that there's suffering there. The second aspect is understanding. So the first one is there is suffering, that's recognition. And then suffering should be understood. So when we recognize that suffering is there, then we have to work and kind of read ourselves, our mind, right? Because our ego is applying these opinions and thoughts and whatever to the situation, we really kind of have to be, in a way, sit back and watch our thinking mind. Watch how our mind is reacting to the situation, right? Because if you're able to watch your mind, right, then you can see some of the trends that may happen. Why, you can ask yourself, why am I getting angry? How am I getting angry? For what reason am I getting angry for, right? And when we analyze our mind like that, and we can maybe recognize a few trends, then we can find that root cause and work on it, right? And then once we're able to do that, then we get to the third aspect, which is realization. And realization is realizing that our suffering has been realized. We're like, okay, this is the root cause of my suffering. Let me work on eliminating it, getting rid of it, and do whatever you need to get over it. So like I mentioned earlier, that any of the practice, any of the teachings is very active. It's not passive, right? And so when we get to situations where we feel maybe anger is coming up, we feel maybe anxiety is rising, or whatever the situation is, we naturally react with the situation, right? So if someone's yelling at us or hitting us, our first reaction is to hit back or yell back, right? Because we're trying to basically defend ourselves. Our mind, our ego is defending itself. If we're retaliating with curses and cuss words the same way that they're doing for us, right? Someone calls me a bad name, I'm going to call you a worse name, right? And it just goes back and forth. But then if we really think about it, I mean, what's that going to accomplish, right? If I called you a bad word and you call me a bad word, this goes back and forth. What's the outcome here? What is the solution? Is there even one, right? All we're going to do is just either say every bad word in the dictionary or make stuff up, or just, all you're going to end up doing is just hurting their feelings, right? Bringing them down, sucking their energy away, right? We're not doing any use by that. And so when we're in that situation, we have to try to be mindful that we shouldn't react right away, right? There's a lot of teachings where it mentions to take at least 3 breaths, right? Or even count to 10 before you react, because we have a habit of reacting right away. Pausing for a few seconds and kind of take a few breaths and recognize what's going on, then we can more positively react in a better way, right? We can respond positively, or maybe not even respond at all, but at least we're not doing anything bad or worse, or to worsen the situation. And then also we get to a point where we have to really investigate our habits of seeking pleasure, right? Because that's part of the suffering, that's part of the impermanence, is we seek out the pleasure of things, right? Whether it's getting a new iPhone that's now out, which I totally want, or wanting a new car or a bigger house or whatever it may be, right? We have to investigate to see where are these desires coming from, right? Because that's the second noble truth, is our suffering is caused because of our desire. And so let's say we get everything we want. Let's say we got the new iPhone. Let's say we got this big house, this fancy car, right? And then we're like, okay, I have everything I want, but something is still missing. I'm still not satisfied, right? Sometimes we have all those things. It was probably like a month ago, when we discussed the 6 realms of existence, right? And one of the 3 higher realms is asuras, the demigods. And these are the people who have everything they want. They want more. They seek more power. They seek more wealth. They seek more fame, right? They're just not satisfied with everything that they already have in the world. They still want more and more and more. So we have to avoid those kind of situations and really investigate our mind and see, where is this desire for these things coming from? Why do I feel the need that I have to have this or have that, right? That's one of the things, like when I first announced to my family and friends that I wanted to become a monk, they're like, why? Like, you have such a good life. I'm like, yeah, I do. So I did, right? I had a really good job. I traveled a lot. I had a big house, bigger than I needed. I had a nice car, a couple cars, and I vacationed multiple times a year, right? I had no reason to give that up, right? And everyone's like, you are so crazy. I'm like, yeah, but I'm just not satisfied with this life. Like, it's a good life, but it's just not, it's not good enough for me, right? I recognize that I'm still suffering regardless of all the nice things I had, but having that life was unsatisfactory. And anyone who's known me has known that I've wanted to become a monk for at least past decade, right? So, and that's probably one of the reasons internally where I didn't really allow things to fully satisfy me, is because I knew one day I would become a monk. So why go after those things, right? Why suffer through phones breaking or losing or having to upgrade? Why suffer through, having to get a new car every year and all the hassle of sitting there for hours, right? Why worry about having to clean a giant house that's just you in there, 2 dogs, fat cat, right? why put myself through all that? Why do we want these things, right? And we really have to kind of dig deep to find that root cause, and to be able to see that, sure, having nice things is nice, right? And we're not saying that you shouldn't have any desire. I'm not saying that you shouldn't have nice things. If you can obtain them, if you can have them, perfectly fine. There's no bad thing about it. The wrong thing to do is to hang on, to grasp, attach yourself to those things, right? So if you were to get the newest iPhone and you literally just dropped it the second you walked out of the store, you're already, like, you just feel like you just lost $1 million almost, right? Because you've attached so much to this new thing, and then it falls and breaks, and you're like, oh, just, I feel like saying bad words, but I can't. But you know what I mean. But at the same time, if we do get that new iPhone, right, we're so satisfied with it. We're playing with it for the first week, first few weeks, maybe for the first month. But after that, it's just like, whatever. It's just a phone. It's just another phone. If it drops, if it dings, if it scratches, right, we don't see the big deal. It's just a phone. Well, wasn't it just a phone when you first bought it, right? Same thing with our cars. If you buy a new car, we're like, I'm gonna keep this car clean. I tell myself all the time, I'm gonna keep this car clean. It's gonna be spotless. I can eat it off the dashboard. It's gonna be so clean. But a month later, you basically live in your car, right? That's how my cars are. So it's like, sure, you want to take care of it, and you hang on to its niceness, its newness for a while, but then after a while, it's just like another thing that you possess, right? And so if we try to really investigate and analyze the things like in our lives, and we realize that it's not a big deal to have nice, fancy things, right? And then get sad and emotional when they're broken or gone or, you know, dead or whatever, you know what I mean. But we don't want to do that. We avoid doing that because we're like, why? I can have it, right? I can just wave my credit card and buy whatever I want or whatever it is, right? We don't really think of the displeasure things bring to us because we don't want to. We don't want to face it. We don't want to face that there's impermanence in things. We don't want to face that we are truly attached in a bad way to things. Because, like I said, you can have desire. You can have a desire to want nice things, a big house, a good job, a nice car. Why you can have those desires, but if your desire, but it turns into a bad desire when you're just clinging on for dear life to make sure it's just the most perfect thing you have, right? And then when something happens, your whole world is just turned upside down, right? And that's what we really try to avoid. So don't react quickly, is what I'm trying to say. A whole other list I wanted to go over, but I'm like, no, that's already good. So anyway, so the point is, and after we've completed the Noble Truths, we'll discuss meditating on the Four Noble Truths, which is basically our remedy to to suffering, to our anger. But just as a quick high level or review of that is, if you feel like anger is arising, if you feel like you're going to be in a situation where something unpleasant is about to happen to you, then we have to be mindful and acknowledge what's happening. Acknowledge that you are feeling a certain way, right? Acknowledge that you're feeling annoyed with someone. Acknowledge that the sun is burning you because you're standing in it for too long, right? Acknowledge what's happening. Try to hold on or try to attain what's actually happening and then find the root cause of that suffering, right? Which is just either pain or discomfort or whatever it is, right? You have to find the root cause. Because if we just say someone hit me, right, and maybe they stabbed me, I'm like, oh, that person stabbed me, ow, it hurts, right? So that's the situation. The pain, the suffering there is the actual pain that you're feeling from the stabbing. But what we typically tend to do is blame that person for stabbing me. Blame them for being around us for stabbing us. We're blaming them on the situation, right? And we can either forget about our wound, right? We may not get to on time or whatever may happen. It's a very uncommon situation, but typically we want to do that for mental suffering, right? For moments of anger or frustration. It's easier because we all have those moments, right? I doubt any of us has been stabbed, so that's a bad example. But we can use just any situation of anger or frustration, right? And instead of being frustrated on waiting in line too long at the drive-thru or being at the stop sign too long or people just driving slow, right? We're blaming other people, but really what's happening here is, where is that suffering happening from, right? Where is that suffering coming from? It's not coming from the people that are making us slow. It's coming from our own mind, our own ego. It's saying, hey, You're too good to be waiting in line this long. You're too good to be driving this slow in traffic or whatever it may be, right? Because we tend to blame other people, we're not able to reflect on ourselves and realize that we are the causes of our pain. We are the reason why we are feeling this way, why we are judging this way, right? And so when we're able to realize that through investigation, through watching our thinking, watching our mind, we're able to accept it a little bit easier. And that way, when those situations arise again, we can be mindful of how they're working, so we don't let them take over us, right? The example I always give is if I called someone a fat purple cow, big fat purple cow, does that actually make them a fat purple cow? It doesn't, right? But sometimes we allow those words to hurt our feelings or bring us down or whatever it is, right? They didn't actually do anything to us except say words, but we allow those words to take over us and to think that we're better than that or not as good as that, whatever it may be, right? All suffering is internal. It's all from us, from our bad habits in our egotistic mind. So I'll stop there. That way I can continue on the second noble truth from that point. Acknowledgement. That's what I was trying to find. We need to acknowledge suffering as it happens, when it happens, and investigate and understand the root, the cause, and then remedy it. You remedy it by mindfulness and by contemplation. Okay. I'll stop there. Any questions, concerns, emotional outbursts? I don't want to hear. Okay. So we'll go ahead and transform the mirror and go into chanting. Namo Shakyamuni Buddha, Namo Shakyamuni Buddha, Namo Shakyamuni Buddha. For any positive karmic action we've accumulated here today, we wish to transfer the merit to all sentient beings and wish them full enlightenment.
Speech and mind in perfect oneness, I send my heart along with the sound of the bell. May the hearers awaken from forgetfulness and transcend all anxiety and sorrow. Listen, listen, this wonderful sound brings me back to my true home. In gratitude we offer this incense to all Buddhas and Bodhisattvas throughout space and time. May it be fragrant earth herself, reflecting our careful efforts, our wholehearted mindfulness, and the fruit of understanding slowly ripening. May we and all beings be companions of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. May we awaken from forgetfulness and realize our true home. The incense in the censer now is burning, all the Dharma realm in every place, auspicious clouds appearing, our sincere intention thus fulfilling, as all Buddhas now show their perfect body, homage to the incense cloud canopy, Bodhisattva and great Bodhisattvas. Homage to the abiding Buddha, the supreme Dharma, and sage of the Sangha, throughout the Dharma realm and the realm of empty space, and 3 periods of time. The fundamental teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha, Maitreya, honored future Buddha, Manjushri, great wisdom, Bodhisattva, universal great conduct, Bodhisattva, all Dharma guarding Deva Bodhisattvas, and the magic fountain, assembly of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. Amitabha Buddha, in the land of ultimate bliss, Avalokiteshvara, great compassion Bodhisattva, great strength Bodhisattva, earth store great vow Bodhisattva, and the assembly of great pure sila Bodhisattvas. Avalokiteshvaraya, Bodhisattvaya, Mahasattvaya, Mahakarunikaya, Om Savalavati, Sudanatasya, Namaskritva Namanarya, Avalokiteshvaraya. Svaha Mahasiddhaya, Svaha Siddhaya Ye, Svaraya, Svaha Nilakanti, Svaha Pranila, Svaha Sri Mukaya, Svaha Sarva Mahasastaya, Svaha Chakrahastaya, Svaha Padma Keshaya, Svaha Nilakanti Kantalaya, Svaha Gopuri Shankaraya, Svaha Namo Ratnatrayaya, Namo Haya, Avalokite, Shavaraya, Svaha Om Siddhyantu, Mantra Pataya Svaha. Dharma body is bringing morning light, concentration, my heart is at peace, a half smile is born on my lips, this is a new day, and I'm about to go through it in mindfulness, the sun of wisdom has risen, shining in every direction, all sides diligently bring your mind into meditation. Namo Shakyamunaye Buddhaya, Namo Shakyamunaye Buddhaya, Namo Shakyamunaye Buddhaya. The one who bows and the one who is bound to are both by nature empty, therefore the communication between them is inexpressibly perfect. Our practice center is the net of Indra, reflecting all Buddhas everywhere. My own person reflects in all Buddhas, to whom with my whole life I go for refuge. Offering light in the 10 directions, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, to whom we bow in gratitude. Teaching and living the way of awareness in the very midst of suffering and confusion. Shakyamuni Buddha, the awakened one, to whom we bow in gratitude. Cutting through ignorance, awakening our minds and our minds, and to Sri the Bodhisattva of great understanding, to whom we bow in gratitude. Working mindfully, working joyfully for the sake of all beings, Samatavajra, the Bodhisattva of great action, to whom we bow in gratitude. Responding to suffering, serving beings in countless ways, Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of great compassion, to whom we bow in gratitude. Of awakening and loving kindness in children, sprouts, and all beings, Maitreya, the Buddha, to be born, to whom we bow in gratitude. Showing the way fearlessly and compassionately, the stream of all our ancestral teachers, to whom we bow in gratitude. The Dharma is deep and lovely, we now have a chance to see it and practice it. We vow to realize its true meaning. Avalokita, while moving in the deep course of perfect understanding, shed light on the five skandhas and found them equally empty. After this penetration, he overcame ill-beingness and Shariputra. Form is emptiness, emptiness is form. It's not other than emptiness, emptiness is not other than form. The same is true with feelings, perceptions, mental formations, consciousness. Listen, Shari Putra. All dharmas are marked with emptiness. They are neither produced nor destroyed, neither defiled nor immaculate, neither increasing nor decreasing. Therefore, in emptiness there is neither form nor feelings, nor perceptions, nor mental formations, nor consciousness, no eye or ear or nose or tongue or body or mind, no form, no smell, no taste, no touch, no object, no realms of elements, no interdependent origins, and no extinction of them, no ill-being, no cause of ill-being, no end of ill-being, and no path, no understanding, no attainment, because there is no attainment. Bodhisattvas ground in perfect understanding find no obstacles for their minds having no obstacles. They overcome fear, liberating themselves forever from illusion and realizing perfect nirvana. All Buddhas in the past, present, and future arrive at full right and universal enlightenment. Therefore, one should know that perfect understanding is the highest mantra, the unequal mantra, the destroyer of ill-being, the incorruptible truth, the mantra of Prajna Paramita should therefore be proclaimed. Gate, gate, para, gate, para, samgate, bodhisvaha, gate, gate, para, gate, para, samgate, bodhisvaha, gate, gate, para, gate, para, samgate, bodhisvaha. We invoke your name, Avalokiteshvara. We aspire to learn your way of listening in order to help relieve the suffering in the world. You know how to listen in order to understand. We invoke your name in order to practice listening with all our attention and open-heartedness. We will sit and listen without any prejudice. We will sit and listen without judging or reacting. We will sit and listen in order to understand. We will sit and listen so attentively that we will be able to hear what the other person is saying and also what is being left unsaid. We know that just by listening deeply, we already alleviate a great deal of pain and suffering in the other person. We invoke your name, Manjushri. We aspire to learn your way, which is to be still and to look deeply into the heart of things and into the hearts of people. We will look with all our attention and open-heartedness. We will look with unprejudiced eyes. We will look without judging or reacting. We will look deeply so that we will be able to see and understand the roots of suffering through the impermanent and selfless nature of all that is. We will practice your way of using the sword of understanding to cut through the bonds of suffering, thus freeing ourselves and other species. We invoke your name, Samantabhadra. We aspire to practice your vow to act with the eyes and heart of compassion, to bring joy to one person in the morning and to ease the pain of one person in the afternoon. We know that the happiness of others is our own happiness, and we aspire to practice joy on the path of service. We know that every word, every look, every action, every smile can bring happiness to others. We know that if we practice wholeheartedly, we ourselves may become an inexhaustible source of peace and joy for our loved ones and for all species. We invoke your name, Chitti Garbha. We aspire to learn your way of being present where there is darkness, suffering, oppression, and despair, so we can bring light, hope, relief, and liberation to those places. community that lives in harmony and awareness. Dwelling in the refuge of Buddha, I clearly see the path of light and beauty in the world. Dwelling in the refuge of Dharma, I learned to open many doors on the path of transformation. Dwelling in the refuge of Sangha, shining light that supports me, keeping my practice free of obstruction. Taking refuge in the Buddha, in myself I aspire to help all people recognize their own awakened nature, realizing the mind of love, taking refuge in the Dharma. In myself I aspire to help all people fully master the ways of practice and walk together on the path of liberation, taking refuge in the Sangha. In myself I aspire to help all people build forthful communities, to embrace all beings and support their transformation. Practicing the way of awareness gives rise to benefits without limits. We vow to share the fruits with all beings. We vow to offer tribute to parents, teachers, friends, and numerous beings who give guidance and support along the path.
Something to glance, I totally forgot as usual. That's on
What's that?
on December 6th. We will celebrate our venerable teacher's 83rd, right, birthday.
83rd, I think.
So he'll turn 83 years young. So if you're able to join us in person, you definitely can. Same distancing and mask required. But we will just be doing a short ceremony of offering a prayer of blessing and gratitude and longevity to our teacher. And then we will give them some offerings, usually give them some flowers. You're more than welcome to bring something as a sweet tooth. So you can bring some chocolates. So love that. So if you are, again, that's Sunday, December 6th. It'll be the same time as our normal service at 12:30. Thank you. I'll check in when you go.